Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, Tierra CRG, the Marengo Family Foundation, and these friends. Welcome to the webinar brought to you by AmTrust Title, Steve Napolitano, Senior Executive Vice President. My name is Michael Stoller, host of the Stoller Report. I'm very happy to have three prominent restaurant and chefs on my show today. I have the legendary Drew Nieporent, Nobu, Tribeca Grill, Bertard, who is celebrating his 30th anniversary next week or 2 weeks of Tribeca Grill. Chef David Burke, owner and operator of 8 restaurants in New Jersey and 4 in New York. And last but not least, the chef, the legendary Michael Lomonaco of the Porterhouse, New York, and Hudson Yards Grill. So all of you were involved after 9/11. How do you compare 9/11 to the restaurant business as it is to the coronavirus? Michael, you were the first-hand person.
Well, I have different experience from everybody else in my experience with 9/11. So, what you're saying is how does it compare? So I lost my restaurant on 9/11, and then we were in recovery mode. And that's different from operating a business as Drew did. So maybe Drew should take the question.
Okay, Drew.
There was a tremendous amount of uncertainty, post 9/11, but there was a sense that, okay, we got attacked, but it wasn't going to be something that was going to be long standing. And in fact, it was only a few days later that we were imploring the mayor of the city of New York to get us open. And he listened to us. And so essentially they opened up the streets. First it was 14th Street, then it became Canal Street. When they finally opened the streets to pedestrian traffic, not vehicular traffic, people came down. That was 2 weeks. We're into this thing over a month now, and maybe how many was it?
We're exactly 30 days into this right now.
This is totally unprecedented. 9/11 was nothing compared to this.
David, on 9/11, you were downtown, correct? You were on the Upper East Side.
I was Upper East. Yeah, I was Upper East. Listen, New York City felt it the most. The rest of the country continued to operate. So it wasn't like what we're in now. I think that after the initial shock of 9/11, the restaurants, the neighborhood restaurants, a couple of days or when they were allowed to operate, they thrived because people stayed close to home. They went to the neighborhood restaurants to get the news and feel comfort and get out. But again, and restaurants were allowed to operate. We were allowed to fundraise. We were allowed to donate food. We had the the opportunity to go help. Right now, it's even hard to help because we have no cash flow and we have no employees and we don't have the right to work.
Immediately after 9/11, there was the city was shut down for a few days. Air traffic was shut down for a few days. Things began to reopen, as Drew says and David says. That's true. But the recovery mode was very different because people set up downtown, and Drew was one of them, who were feeding the first responders who were downtown, the recovery responders, the police. That was a big effort by the restaurant community to feed those who were working on the pile. That was what it was called, the pile. That engaged the city, but from my point of view, the city was very quiet for that first month, even though streets may have been reopened for pedestrian traffic, and certainly the Manhattan wasn't closed. The businesses were open. People were going back to work the following week, but things were quiet. People were sheltering. People were going home at night. They weren't going to restaurants, and thanks to the restaurant community, and I mentioned the restaurant community banded together, and we formed the foundation Windows of Hope Family Relief Fund, and Drew and David all participated in fundraising on October 11th. And chefs like Tom Valenti and Waldy Maloof were my partners in that foundation and in setting up that foundation for the families. So that was an effort to get people out of their homes and back into life again. And Drew and David could comment on that, but I think that after October 11th, things began to perk up a little bit. It was autumn. Autumn came to New York, and the pile was an ongoing work. The tragedy was definitely with us. We were wearing it like a cloak. It was so heavy, but I think that we had a sense of recovery. We're still in shutdown mode, so we don't know what recovery looks like.
Well, the one huge difference is when we're feeding the rescue workers, there's no fear of any kind of health issues to us. Now, these people are putting their lives on the line because we just don't know how this disease is transmitted. We do know, of course, it's through droplets and whatever, but I mean, it's so random that certain people seem to get very minor symptoms and recover. And then other people after 2 days are dead. And I mean, I watch the TV. I have to turn it off because it's so depressing that you see people, families, fathers of 4 or 5 kids dying, with very little exposure. Apparently, this is a totally different situation, Michael. I'm not sure. I cannot predict how it's going to play out because we're in the earliest days of this. But it's and it's almost amazing to say it, but 9/11 pales in comparison to this. Now, poor Michael Lomonaco was the chef of Windows on the World, which was blown out of the sky. I mean,
Right, and you lost 76 employees, Michael, on that date.
79. You lost 79. So, but
in Michael's world, nothing could be as bad as that. But his was the only restaurant, maybe Hudson River Club. But from my understanding, I mean, 9/11 affected his restaurant in such a stunning way, but this thing has affected millions of restaurants around the world.
There's a perception. The Seton Hall just came out with a report today saying that 72% of Americans polled said they would not attend sporting events resumed without a vaccine for the coronavirus, and 12% said they wouldn't go without social distancing. Drew, you operate at Madison Square Garden, you operate at Citi Field, okay? 2 specific places. Michael, you're running at 2 major facilities, the Time Warner Center and the Hudson Yards, okay, with tourists and everything. And David, you operate, all over, plus a significant number of properties in Saratoga. If people are scared and won't go to a sporting event, and today Lincoln Center, which is right next to Time Warner Center, said that they're not going to have any concerts this summer. How are we going to restart the restaurant business?
I'll just jump in and say this. If people feel that they're taking their life in their hands by going to social event, whether it's a Broadway show, a sporting event, a restaurant. It's going to be a long time before we acclimate to normal conditions. So the president of the United States is essentially saying, we got to get the economy started again. We got to get open. Yet there's no, behind that statement, there's no assurance that you will be healthy if you go back to work. And then the people who know something about this say, well, if you test and you don't have the virus any longer, and you have, in fact, the ability to fight off the virus, then you can go back to work. But guess what, Michael? They're not testing anybody. I can't get a test. So, to answer your question, there's just too much uncertainty. Nobody's going to wave a magic wand and say, all safe, go back to work. Because the second somebody gets sick, going to a Broadway show, going to a restaurant, forget it. All bets are off.
I think that we're going to have to really study how Asia has handled crises like this, how they've recovered. It's really a working model that's happening on the other side of the globe, and that might include masks more than we know. That might include social distancing in a different way, or temperature checks. We're a different society, so we're not gonna so easily adapt to some of the things that they've done in China. But we surely are going to learn from other people's examples. So, we're trying to figure it out. Just as you asked the question, we're trying to figure out how that happens. Just any place, as you said, sporting events or shopping centers or department stores, anything, any store. I mean, my supermarket on the corner has the street taped off, and they're counting people in. That's a supermarket, right? And that's happening all over, right? Where they're limiting the amount of people in a store at a time. So this is mind-boggling, and we're having to solve these problems on the go.
Right. The one thing we do know, because this is the one thing they're emphasizing, is social distancing is helping to conquer the problem. But think about what social distancing is. It's like you're staying indoors. You're not going near anybody. So how does that bode to go to a sporting event or go to a restaurant? It's nuts. I mean, if we have to live the rest of our lives to stay alive by not being around anybody, who knows? That could be a reality.
Mr. Burke said a couple of weeks ago, I think on one of the TV shows, that at least 1/3 of the restaurants won't reopen and won't rehire people. What do you believe after this? What percentage of restaurants? It's difficult enough to be in the restaurant business. How difficult is it going to be in the future?
Well, listen, I think that it is difficult. It's been difficult for quite some time, especially in a city like New York with minimum wage being so high. So the last couple of years have been very difficult. There has to be an adjustment to rents again, and we don't know how busy we're going to be. We could get the green light to open in mid-May, and that might mean, depending on the consumer and their confidence of coming back into a public place, we might do 20 dinners as opposed to 200. So how much staff can we even bring back? I think it's a slow growth to get back to, if we ever get back to normal. It's going to take a long time. It's going to have a lot to do with confidence. But I think some people, economically, that won't make sense for a lot of restaurateurs and those chefs. And I think they're going to say, this is just too difficult. And look, I would think going forward, people think twice about signing a lease for a business that's so difficult to run, and something like this can knock you out of the park. This might not be the only pandemic we see in the next few years. And if it comes back in, what happens again? You get sidelined. It's like living in a flood zone. How many times are you going to keep rebuilding?
New York City had 67 million visitors to last year. The visitors come. The visitors are responsible for filling up your restaurants and other businesses over here. People aren't going to travel that much. How much do you think your business, when you reopen, will be? How long will it take you to get back to the levels that you were doing prior to the coronavirus in March?
Look, the worst case scenario is what you just stated, which is, most of us run restaurants where at least 30 to 40% are visitors. And without that customer base, forget about it. I know, irregardless of what happens, when I reopen, I'll be cheaper, I'll have a tighter menu, and I'll have to cut my payroll enormously to just survive. And that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to get open, but it's not going to be business as usual because it's not going to bounce back like it was. Maybe a hot restaurant. There's a couple of places that you couldn't get near, been open for a year or two, but if they impose a restriction as to how far the tables are going to be apart, a lot of these restaurants are very small, and they need every single table that they can have. So,
being a hot restaurant might be the kiss of death in the near future, because I wouldn't want to go to a hot restaurant right now. I'd want to go to a neighborhood restaurant where I maybe someone's not sitting next to me. So, a hot restaurant might not be the smart thing right now. It might be the tried and true place that's going to, keep the pace at the door to a manageable amount of people at a time instead of overbooking.
No one can predict how many restaurants will be able to reopen. I mean, there's a lot of numbers that we throw around. It's 30% or 40 or 50. The basis of the restaurant business is it's a small business. Many of them are family run or single owner proprietor. There are so many all over the city and all over the country. Restaurants have always led the way in development, not only in big buildings or big cities. The restaurant expands the idea of a neighborhood or a small town. They add to the culture of a place, and they often open and then create a popularity for that neighborhood that they're in. Restaurants lead the way many ways in development of neighborhoods, whether it's gentrification of a city or redevelopment, I mean to say, rather than gentrification, redevelopment. This is something that we're going to probably see entrepreneurship that happens out of this as well, out of this tragic situation we're in. But how to predict what happens to small businesses? That's really what you're asking. What's going to happen to a small business that can't tide themselves over for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months? How do they reopen? Probably with the help of their landlord. I think you should probably.
Which is what I want to bring up the fact. How are your landlords, or how are the landlords in the industry that you speak to all the time reacting to this? Yesterday, David, you mentioned that your landlord on East 62nd Street has offered you certain abatements.
Well, I think every landlord is going to be different, whether you're dealing with a corporate landlord or an individual landlord, or depending on the landlord. My landlord lives above the restaurant. She's reached out and offered a several months of free rent for now, and then I told her when the time comes, we'll figure out how to get to that. We'll negotiate perhaps a new lease. We've got 9 or 10 years left, and we certainly can't afford to pay what we signed up to pay, because we're not sure whether we'll be able to even use the amount of square footage to fill people up. If there's a mandate on you can only use half your dining room or only spread people out, that affects our number. So we'll have to renegotiate and look at maybe a percentage rent for the next couple of years until we get back up, or flexibility. I mean, communication. I'm confident that we'll be able to work something out, because I don't think a landlord's in a position to lose a good tenant right now, because who else is going to go in and take over? I mean, if the business isn't there, the business isn't there.
The Cheesecake Factory, arguably one of the most successful restaurant groups, in our country, put it out to all their landlords: no rent in April. They're not going to pay anybody. So if the Cheesecake Factory is not paying anybody, I think that sets the tone for all of us.
Well, every property owner has their own way of dealing with this. I'm sure it's going to vary from operation to operation. And, I'm in both of my restaurants are in big, as David mentioned, corporate held, so the landlord understands the economics of the restaurant business. The restaurants add value to the location. The restaurants are on a completely different economic basis than the retail businesses that surround us. So, we think that they understand what our situation is right now. And, the hope is that we can work out planning, as even David and Drew were saying, planning that helps us be able to restart. and I'm sure we will. I'm very confident in that.
Now, in a similar manner, the landlords, all of your landlords, including yours, Michael, who are corporate over landlords, they have debt to pay to the banks. So it's a combination that you have to have the landlord willing to do something, and the lenders have to be doing something. So it's more than a one-player partnership over there.
That is true, and it's such a complicated set of people who are involved, of entities who are involved along the way. The landlords and the lenders have to work together to be able to welcome their tenants back. The landlords don't want to lose tenants, and the lenders are going to have to understand the position of the landlords. The landlords are now in a situation that they couldn't anticipate or expect, and need some breathing room as well. So all of this stimulus package, I haven't heard these elements come up yet in the stimulus package, and maybe that's in package 2 or package 3, but there are going to be the lenders who are going to want relief, and Thomas Keller announced yesterday or today that he's filing suit against his insurance company for not covering him adequately or at all, and all of
business interruption insurance.
Right, business interruption insurance. So then you'll get the insurance companies who will want some sort of relief as well, as they did in 2008, 2009.
Michael, the one thing I would say is, you have 3 of us who operate mostly in New York City, New Jersey, right next door. I've had restaurants on the West Coast, but anywhere in America today, the real estate is stupid. And the reason the real estate is stupid is because market rent is what some idiot decides to pay on the corner across the street from you after you've been there 20 years. And then, you're supposed to pay the same rent as that person. Or, you're paying a percentage rent. In the case of Michael Lomonaco, his partner's a developer, so most probably he has to pay a percentage rent. So the reality is, whether you do $1 or you do 20 million, your percentage rent is the same. So there has to be an adjustment. The whole thing with the real estate is going to be a huge adjustment, because we were at the peak of the market. I'm sorry, but we were paying too much. And if those of us if we're fed up and we don't go back in, and Donald Trump says, well, the restaurants that don't go back in, somebody else is going to take their place. Well, you know what? They're not going to pay the rent that we were paying. They're going to pay something else.
We have to leave at this time, and we'll return next week.